Ho ho ho, and Merry Christmas. With just 1 week left, my organization is as busy as ever. I'm running it as a modern workplace now. To tell you what, I'm a little bit concerned about all that personal and confidential information I need to protect. Think about all the wish lists from the children, and think about all that planning and the routes for delivering all that gifts on the Christmas Eve. What Santa Claus and I have in common is that we both work for organizations that use cloud services and need to protect their sensitive information. It could be business confidential information, it could be secrets, it could be personally identifiable information. That's why I today will talk about Azure Information Protection and how that can help protecting your sensitive information. First of all, I would like to thank Gregor Suti and Richard Hooper for providing this great initiative of Azure Advent Calendar. I've learned a lot watching the other contributions, and I'm very happy and proud to be part of that lineup. So, let's go into Azure Information Protection. So, my name is Jan Vidar Elven, and I'm going to take you through Azure Information Protection. Microsoft Information Protection is not really a product. It's more a framework of different kinds of solutions, and one of those solutions is Azure Information Protection. We also have other information protection solutions like Office 365 DLP, data loss prevention. We have Windows Information Protection, we have Cloud App Security, we have Microsoft Intune, and so on. And together with the other security solutions in the Microsoft platform, it will provide a holistic approach to securing not only your users and devices and applications, but also your data. Protecting sensitive information can be seen like in a life cycle. First of all, you need to have capabilities to detect what kind of sensitive data do you have in your organization. What kind of data is stored in your Office 365 tenant, for example? What kind of data is stored on your local on-premises systems, like file servers or local SharePoint servers, for example? You can also have data stored directly on your clients or inside your cloud applications. So when you find that data, you can have capabilities for classifying that data based on the sensitivity, and you can apply labels which might also bring protection. Protection will give encryption so that only the intended users or groups are able to access that data. And then you need to be able to monitor and report, get alerts, and maybe do remediation if people are sharing confidential information outside the organization, for example. You want to be able to remove that capability. So information protection and Azure Information Protection, it spans from on-premises to cloud. On-premises, you can run Azure Information Protection Scanner, where you can scan for and look for sensitive data. On your devices and endpoints, you can look at the Office applications that are installed on your clients and what kind of data that your users are communicating using email or Office apps, for example. And for the cloud applications like Office 365, you can also look at what kind of sensitive data you have stored in your SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business. Or you can look at connected third-party software as a service applications like Salesforce or Dropbox and see if you have sensitive data there. So let's go into the getting started bit. How can you get started with Azure Information Protection? First of all, you need to deploy and use the Azure Information Protection service. And then you need to decide, are you going to do classification, labeling, and protection, or just protection only? The protection only part is also called Azure Rights Management Service, RMS. But if you want to also do classification and labeling, then you need the full Azure Information Protection solution. So there are different ways to deploy and follow a roadmap, which I will show in that link here. To activate the service, first of all, you need to have licenses in your tenant. Some of the Office 365 enterprise subscriptions, for example, they give you the opportunity to use protection or the RMS functionality. If you want to use Azure Information Protection with classification and labeling, then you need an Azure Information Protection plan. And the plan exists today in Plan 1 and Plan 2 levels. Azure Information Protection Plan is also included in the Enterprise Mobility plus Security license suite. So if you have EMS E3, then you also have Azure Information Protection Plan 1. And if you have EMS E5, then you have Azure Information Protection Plan 2. So you can activate that service in the Office 365 admin portal, or you can activate it in the Azure portal. You can also use Azure Rights Management Administration tool in PowerShell to activate the service. This is a one-time service activation that you need to do in the beginning of setting up the service in your tenant. After you have activated the service, you need to make sure that your applications are configured. So there are different kinds of ways to use applications with Azure Information Protection. Most newer Office clients have that capability all automatically included, and some of the online solutions, of course, as well. You can also go into Exchange Online and SharePoint Online and configure the information rights management services, which automatically can provide protections for your email communications and also for your document libraries. To configure Azure Rights Management, you should also look into how you can control onboarding. If you are just starting to use this in your organization, it might make sense to just scope it down to a pilot group, for example. So by controlling onboarding, which you have to do in the PowerShell commandlets, then you can say that, okay, for just this security group, these are the only ones that are able to use the protection templates. You should also look into configuring super users, because that will enable your organization to use discovery and recovery scenarios. A super user will always have the rights management full control users right for documents and emails that have been protected. So consider the following scenario. You have users that are owner of documents and they protect that document so only they can have access to it. And then that user maybe leave your organization. And how can you get access to that data again? This is where the super user functionality comes in handy. This feature is disabled by default. Super users can be individual users, it could be service principals, or it could be a group. You should have some restrictions for configuring super users. Basically, a super user can have access to everybody's protected documents. So you need to have control who are global administrators in your organization. This is something you should have a big reduction on anyway. And you can also control which admins are in the Azure AD DRM role-based administrator. You should also look into the admin log, because if users are adding themselves into those roles, you should look into why they do that. For example, the admin log will show anybody that enables themselves as super users. So you might also set up some automatic alerts on that. Users and groups must be prepared before you can use Azure Information Protection. Users and groups, first of all, they need to be present in Azure Active Directory. There are 3 scenarios for how these are used. So for admins, you need to be able to have users and groups to assign labels via scoped policies. For admins and for users, you can assign users rights and access controls. If, for example, I want to share a document with my colleague and I want to let my colleague only have reader access to that document, then I would require that user to be Azure AD, and it has to be configured with an user principal name or an email address that I can use. You also need to have users and groups for configuring an Azure Rights Management service in itself, like the admin settings, for example, scoped onboarding, which I mentioned earlier. So the requirements for users and groups are that for users, you need to have a proxy address and user principal name. If you don't have a proxy address, like the email address for the user, then the user principal name will be used. For every verified email domain in the organization, you can use any of the email domains inside the proxy addresses attributes for the user, and then you can set permissions to documents based on those different kinds of proxy addresses. The same applies for groups. Then you need to have email address for one of the tenant's verified domains, like a mail-enabled group. So you cannot use security groups directly if you don't have mail enabled it. That's an important thing to remember, except for onboarding or delegation of admin rights. External users and groups, same requirements as internal for email attributes. So you're using consistently the email attributes for sharing or setting permissions. What if people change their email addresses? Well, if you have shared a document and set a custom permission via Azure Information Protection to another user, and that user changed their email address, you should make sure that the old email address still exists in the proxy addresses attribute, so that there are no stops in accessing that data. So let's go into configuring Azure Information Protection policy. You need to have a policy defined in your tenant for users to be able to use labels and classifications. You have a global policy. Global policy is available for everyone. Scoped policies are enabled for only a subset of your users. Labels. As you can see on the screenshot here, I have labels for personal data, public data, general, confidential, and highly confidential. Labels can be used for classification of data. It can also be configured with marking, for example, a watermark or a header or a footer to the document. And you can also configure labels for protection so that they are also encrypted with access only for the defined users or groups. It's possible in Azure Information Protection to have different set of languages. So you can have labels on English and, for example, for your native language, like I would do for Norway. And now you can also have unified labeling. That means that the labels you configure in Azure Information Protection policy also will automatically be synchronized to the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. And then you will have support for a lot more of the forward-coming clients. We will get into that later. So let's start by doing a demo for Azure Information Protection configuration. Inside the Azure Information Protection blade, you can find a quick start guide with some links and documentations. The thing we are most interested in now first is to go to protection activation. And from there we can see that the status is activated for my tenant. You could possibly deactivate it if you want to, if you have been just using it for a test or pilot and want to disable it again. But in most cases you will have your tenant activated like this. You can also activate information protection settings inside the Office 365, Microsoft 365 Admin Center. There you have a link for settings to Microsoft Azure Information Protection. And you can look at the link there and you will see that rights management is activated. If you are not licensed to use the full Azure Information Protection plans and only are using Office 365 and right management services, you might go in here to activate that service. So back to the Azure Information Protection blade. I will see that under classifications I have policies, and you will have the default policy, which is global, and that is for all users in your tenant. You can also create scoped policies for your end users. For example, I have some scoped policies for my normal users in my tenant, and I also have some demo users based on the Seinfeld character, so I have created a scoped policy for that. And the labels, you configure them under classifications and labels, and you tell what kind of policy those labels should be a part of. So these labels are configured for the global policy, but if I expand on the top level labels, you will see that I have created sub-labels which I have linked to the scoped policies, and the same for confidential. So, for example, if I go into one Elven confidential policy, I can type in a display name for that label. I can type in a description. I can also set if there are some automatic protection for that label. I can also set up visual markings like header or footer or a watermark. And I can also configure conditions for automatically applying this label. Automatically applying labels will look for conditions in your document or your emails and automatically apply that label if the condition is set. Like if I click add a new condition here, and I can look for some industry type information like credit card number or personal identifiable information like a national identity number. So and I can also look into different kinds of industry sets, or I can create my custom conditions where I can look for exact phrases or patterns for if I have a confidential project in my organization, I would look for that kind of information and automatically apply a label and a classification for that. You can also even use regular expressions, so that you have a lot of options for automatically applying labels. Note that everything that's automatically classifications and labels, you need the Azure Information Protection Plan 2 to be able to use that. If I want to do a protection for a label, I will just select Protect here, and then I can say that I want to use the Azure Protection, which in reality is the rights management service part. I can also use have your own key if I have set up an existing Active Directory rights management service. If I set permissions, I can use the user-defined permissions, which will prompt the user to select a custom permission right there and then when the label is set. For example, in Outlook, this will apply a do not forward permission. In Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and File Explorer, it will prompt for custom permissions. If I select just set permission, then I can click add permissions, and I can select, for example, all my organization or any authenticated user, which also will be everyone that's authenticated to Azure Active Directory in any way, including guests. And I can browse the directory for example, a group. Let's see here. Yeah, so Elven protected users, for example, that's a group I have. And then I can say that this group should have reviewer access. Or I can have viewer, or I can select custom and use one of the custom permission sets for this label. So I will just skip back here. And do not save. So you see that for some of my policies, like I have a confidential recipients only, then I have created a protection automatically for that, which says that in Outlook I apply do not forward, and I prompt for custom permissions in the other Office apps. So if I want to add a new label, I will just click here, and then I can type a label, display name, a description. I can select a color for it if I want to do some protection and so on. And after I created the label, I can add it to either the global policy or to one of the scoped policies I have. Users will only see the global labels or the policies that they are scoped to. So for example, if I go to Elven Information Protection Policy, I will see that I have scoped this protection policy to Elven protected users. There are some different kinds of settings I can define for each policy, like logging. I can set requirements for a label so that every document needs a label anyway. I can set settings for provide justification to set a lower classification label, or removing a label, or remove protection. I can set that attachments for emails will apply a label that matches the highest classification of those attachments. And I can set settings for displaying information protection bar in Office apps in the Outlook ribbon, or at least make the custom permission option available for user without using one of the labels. So there's also some advanced settings for each of the policies, which I can do some flags here. I can, for example, disable do not forward. I set that to false. Enable custom permissions. Yes, I want users to be able to set custom permissions. Do I want to hide the protection bar in the Office clients by default, true or false, and so on. So these are some of the settings that are available for the different policies. Previously, you need to publish any changes you made to policies or labels before they get activated. This functionality is now removed, so every change you do will be automatically available for end users. There are some other settings here as well. I don't have time to go into that now, but AIP scanner, Azure Information Protection scanner, there you can set up and register scanners on your on-premises environment and look for protected information, sensitive information there. You can also configure analytics, which will provide Azure Information Protection logs into your log analytics workspace. And then you can have visibility into usage, activity logs, data discovery, and so on. Some of these settings require that you have Windows Enterprise and Windows Defender ATP configuration together with Azure Information Protection. The last thing I will want to show in this demo is the unified labeling. In this tenant, I haven't activated it yet. So let's do that. Unified labeling will make sure that the same labels I configure here will be visible in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, Security Center or Compliance Center admin portals. So I need to press Activate, yes. Before I do that, just have a quick look over to the Security and Compliance Center. Because in sensitivity labels here, you can see I have no labels. It's actually recommending me to go and turn on unified labeling. Previously, you might have different labels in the Security and Compliance Center. So you have the opportunity to have a different set of labels and protections for Office 365 than for Azure Information Protection, but that is not really usable. So you are recommended to turn on the migration of labels, which will provide a two-way synchronization between those settings, so you can have a unified experience. So if I click yes here, so after a little while you will see that unified labeling is now activated, and we have a status page showing that the following labels are successfully migrated to Unified Labeling Store. So if I go into the Security and Compliance Center now and click refresh, I will see that all those labels now are synchronized over. Now I can make changes either here or in the Azure Information Protection portal, and those settings will be synchronized between those two settings. So with that, we go back to the presentation and look into using Azure Information Protection from the client and user experience side. So let's look at the client side of things. Using Azure Information Protection from a client and user experience side. Which client to use? We have several options for clients consuming Azure Information Protection. There is actually a built-in labeling client for Office. Office for Windows, Office for Mac, the Office apps on your mobile phones and so on will continually add new features which can use the Azure Information Protection labeling directly. You can also install the Azure Information Protection Unified Labeling Client for Windows. This is a new client which supports all the synchronized labels from Azure Information Protection over to Office 365 Security and Compliance, which I showed earlier in the demo. You also have the old existing classic client for Azure Information Protection. These two clients, the Unified Labeling and the classic client, they are installable clients, which also makes it available to protect existing files on your clients. You can right click on files in File Explorer, for example, and you can apply protection directly. They also bring a set of PowerShell command lists for protecting files automatically or in batch, or configuring, for example, AIP scanner. But if you are not in the need for using that kind of functionality and usually work with documents inside your Office applications, then you really don't need to install any client. You can probably make do with the built-in labeling client for Office. There's also a older rights management client add-in you can install for consuming protected information if you don't use the Azure Information Protection labeling and classifications functionality. So there are more information, and the features are quite specifically and detailed listed on that documentation site I have on my screen now. And you should look into that really for carefully examining what client you really need to use. But now in the following demo, I will show a little bit how this information can be processed using the different kind of clients. Before I go into the client side of the demo, I need to pick up where I left off earlier in the demo, where I configured the unified labeling synchronization between Azure Information Protection and the Security and Compliance Center here in Office 365. Before I can let the users access those sensitivity labels, I need to publish them. So if I click on Publish Labels, then I can select which labels I want to publish. So let's start with the top level ones, like personal, public, general. And I also had confidential, and also I had highly confidential. These are the top level labels. If I go back to the Azure Information Protection and look at the labels I was publishing for the global policy, which every user should have available anyway. So let's see here. Then I can see these are the labels I want to publish. I also want to have the sub-labels that are global, like all company, like anyone or recipients only, and the same here with anyone or recipient only. So I don't want to publish now the specific scope policies. So I will just leave that out. So I will have all company. I will not have the Elven internal because that's a scoped one, and the same with confidential. I will have the anyone and recipients only, and the same with these here. So basically, I'm publishing all the labels with except those that are scoped. And when I click next, I can select all users and groups because it's a global policy, and I want all users and groups to be able to use them. So next, I can set a default policy setting. So for example, all data is per definition public, for example. And I can also set that users would provide justifications. I can require that they have to set a label, or provide a link with a custom help page. That could be very useful in an onboarding pilot scenario, for example. So I will just set it like this now. And then I can have a policy for this name, and I can say global all users, and I can have a description for that. So like global policy for sensitivity labels, for example. And then I can select to submit, and the policy have been created and they are now published. So if I want to find that global policy back next, I can go to label policies, and I will see that it actually have a policy for this, and I can just edit that later if I want to. So this is a required step before users can use their Office applications or sites or groups or so on to use that labeling, classifications and protection capabilities. So with that, we will skip over to the client and look how it looks there. So in this newly installed client, I've just launched my Microsoft Word application, and I haven't installed any Azure Information Protection client now. As you can see here from my control panel and add remove programs, there's only Office 365 Pro Plus and Teams and OneDrive installations. So you can see that I already have this sensitivity add-in where I can choose between which labels that are published to me as a user. So you can see the personal, public, general, confidential. If I, for example, select confidential and anyone, you can see that it has the footer I configured as classified as confidential, for example. So these are built-in functionality. If I also go to the Outlook application and select to create a new email, you can see also here that I have the sensitivity, and now I can also select, for example, confidential and recipients only, which only provides permission for the intended recipients. So if you want to, you can also download the clients that will bring richer functionality. For example, there are two clients you can download for information protection. One is the unified labeling client, and one is the classic client. You can also download MSE files for automatic deployment, for example, via Config Manager, Intune, or other solutions for each of those clients. So let's have a look at how the classic client looks. So I'll just see here. The classic client also had demo policy. It's great for environments where you don't have created an Azure Information Protection policy yet. But now I'll just click agree here. After the installation is finished and I relaunch Word, I can now see a protect button. And here I have all those labels. And it now also pulls information directly from the Azure Information Protection portal and not from the Security and Compliance Center. So now you can see the scoped policies are here. And I also have a custom permission and a track and revoke button. You will see later for the unified labeling client that's a little bit different there. So that's an important thing to note, that the classic AIP client, it pulls the labels from the policies, including the scope policies, directly from the Azure Information Protection portal. But then you really need that client, and you can only use that those policies in the Office apps. So there's no sensitivity apps anymore. So instead, let's go and I will just do a refresh here, and I will remove that client. And now there will be a pause in the video as well, and then I will install the unified labeling client. And then after installing the unified labeling client, now I have the sensitivity button back. But now you can see that it only pulls the labels that are published in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. So if I now select, for example, all company, I can select that. It's just an protection without a label without protection, or I can select, for example, confidential and recipients only. And this will provide the pop-up dialog for setting specific permissions directly. You note that from earlier, when I didn't have any client installed at all, I didn't get this pop-up up, because this is a custom permission dialog box, and actually I was missing those recipients only policies when I didn't have a client installed. So now you know the different kinds of solutions and clients and what they provide. And I also want to show that if you go, for example, in just create kind of a local document in my disk here, and I also can click right click and classify and protect, so I can also protect files directly. For example, protect Acrobat PDF files or something. So you can see this also provides the client. So clients are usually the solution you want to install, and going forward the unified labeling client is the most usable client. Let's wrap up this session with some advanced scenarios for integration insights, reporting, and remediation. If you turn on Analytics, your Azure Information Protection information will be provided through a log analytics workspace you set up. And from there you can get data discovery, you can get usage analytics, you can dive into logs and specifically look for information and create alerts and so on with all the functionality provided in Log Analytics and Azure Monitor. For example, here I have some activity for the last month, which type of information is mostly used, what kind of endpoints that labeling has happened in, and so on. To be able to provide this data discovery, you need to have Azure Information Protection setting enabled for Microsoft Defender Security Center. Then you will be forwarded the signals to this usage analytics workspace. You can also look at usage report, what kind of label activity, protection activity you have for users. So that will provide a great detail of information looking into how your organization is using Azure Information Protection. You can also use Cloud App Security, and Cloud App Security makes you able to scan for Azure Information Protection classification labels and content. So you can also create rules and file policies there, so that you can get greater insights and also apply governance settings. For example, if you see that documents that are supposed to be confidential internal are shared externally, then you can say that, okay, we have a policy that we should either do some governance and remove the sharing, but we can also apply classification labels with protection if it hasn't already been set, and then it should be. You can also have session and activity policies that automatically protects documents that are downloaded from clients that are not compliant or domain joined to your organization, for example. So you have a range of different kind of governance and policies that can protect your information when people are trying to move it outside your organization. So with that, I will stop this session now. Thanks for watching. You can reach out to me on social media or my blog if you want to know more about Azure Information Protection and other security scenarios. And with that, I will just leave the last few words to Santa Claus again. Thank you. Hi again. I'm glad you're still here. I've certainly learned a lot about Azure Information Protection. I will start using it right away for protecting all that sensitive information I have. With that, I want to thank you for your time and wish you the very, very best and Merry Christmas. And maybe you will find something under your tree.